Welcome to the Resource Profile tutorial for Saviom ERM Web. In this video, I'll be creating a resource profile screen, and I'll explain all the different critical fields that are there. They'll be useful for you to understand for when you're setting up data or just playing around with the software. Now that I've entered the software, I'll be creating a new resource, and the first thing I'll do is select Add. When you do this, a resource detail screen appears, and from here we can see all the information that we can fill in. The first field you can see are the options of being a power user, a light user, or a non-user. Firstly, the power user can add and modify resources, projects, and bookings within Saviom. If I've been given access of being a power user, I can add and modify resources, projects, and bookings within Saviom according to their security access rights. Light users, on the other hand, cannot add and modify resources, projects, and bookings within Saviom. They only have viewing capabilities and limited modification rights. Both light and power users have access to the software.
When having these access rights, you will require your own login ID and password to enter as well, as seen over here. Non-users are those that cannot access Saviom and are purely resources to be allocated by the power users. Now, the next critical field on the resource profile page is the employee ID, a field which allows you to store a unique ID for identifying a record. This field is important for when you interface it with another system. So for example, if it finds an ID in Saviom, then it simply just updates the record, and if it's not found, it inserts a fresh new record into the software. So this shows the linking and how Saviom works with external software. We then move on to the resource type field, where we move on and see what type of resource we're looking to create. So in this case, it's an engineer. As per the resource type, the roles can be categorized. So for example, as I've selected engineers as the resource type, the roles that will be available over here will all be the engineering related ones. We can then determine the start and end date. So let's say I'm determining the start and end date for my resource Bob Smith. So firstly, I'll have to put in his name. And I need to determine when his contract started and when it's going to end. So let's say it started in January 1st, 2016, and it ends on, let's say, in August 1st. So he's been working with the company for about 7 to 8 months. So let's say after the 1st of August, his schedule will be completely grayed out, while the schedule before he begins his contract, in this case, which is 1st of January, will be grayed out as well. So this means within the time frame of January 1st to August 1st, he'll be able to be scheduled onto certain work. What this achieves in terms of scheduling is that it keeps track of people who are only available for a certain window of time. What also determines your availability is your calendar. So the calendar is essentially made up of two different components. The first one is your work week. So these are just the normal days you're working during the week. So in this case for Bob Smith, his calendar is a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday calendar. So he's working 4 days a week and is on a part-time basis. While the second component is the holiday group. So the holiday group defines the public holidays that the resource receives. So this could be based on maybe city or by the national holidays or any type of religious public holidays that can be integrated into the schedule. The calendar is selected in the calendar history section, which is at the bottom of the screen and will be covered near the end of this video. We finally reached the number of hours, which gets calculated according to the resource's work calendar and their available hours. So for example, Bob Smith works 8 hours a day and works, let's say, 4 days a week over here, which means that his hours per period, which in this case is his hours per week, is set for 32 hours. We then move to the next section, which is the organization section. This section defines the organizational structure to which the resource belongs to, and the employee relationship to the organization. Now, the following fields can be configured and renamed. So for example, depending on your organization structure, department can be renamed to matter, or let's say team can be renamed to group. These fields can accordingly be used as criteria for when searching for different resources for when you're doing your resource allocation. We then come to the next section, which is the resource indicator section, where you can essentially indicate what type of resource that you're looking to create. What I'll be doing is, I'll be going through each resource indicator and defining them. So let's say if the resource, in this case Bob Smith, is selected as a resource, that means that the person can be allocated job work and appear in the booking schedule. And let's say I also select supervisor, that means Bob Smith is given extra responsibilities for, let's say, employee empowerment, employee training and development, employee motivations, organizational development, team building and mentoring, and anything else you want to define. So now that I've selected Bob Smith as a supervisor, he'll also appear on the drop-down within the organization section once I've saved this into his profile. A generic resource, also known as the parking spot, dummy resource, or placeholder, are the resources that have tentative jobs booked onto them and are generally useful for allocating for forecasted future projects. These are not real named resources and are there for temporary allocation. We now move on to the roles section within the resource profile screen. The role is the customary function of a resource within an organization. Resources can have multiple roles listed, which will all appear in the search area within the software. So in this case, I can give Bob the role of being in civil engineering, and as maybe also, or also as, let's say, a foreman. You can also select one of the following to determine the primary role of a resource. So in this case, between the two, his primary role still is in civil engineering. You can then further determine the certification that the resource holds. So let's say for Bob Smith, I want to add one. And I want to give him, let's say I have to first determine the certification type. So in this case, it's just a general. And then the certification is, let's say I want to give him, he holds OH&S training. And this is, let's say, valid from March 22nd all the way up until, let's select over here, maybe for 6 months. So up until, let's say, September, middle of September, so about September 20th, sorry. So what happens now is that when we come closer to the certification's valid to date, an email can be generated and sent to the resource and their supervisor so that the appropriate action can be taken, letting you know that the certification is about to expire. So now I can save this on, and this will automatically appear over here. Further down, you can define the resource's competencies. So firstly, you can determine the capability type. So over here, it can be industry-specific skills like your engineering skills, or just more managerial or higher level skills, or certain qualifications as well. So in this case, I'm going to select engineering. You can then go deeper into that and determine the competencies within that capability type. So within engineering skills, I can select, let's say, he has civil engineering skills, and then we can also maybe add another one and give him, let's say, supervising skills as well. You can then further determine the capability level as well, so the level of expertise. So in this case, in civil engineering, I can say that he's an expert, and in supervising, he's on an intermediate level. Your capability type is directly determined by your resource type, which was shown earlier in the video. And this is in the basic section of the screen. So in this case, as the resource type is an engineer, all the capabilities that are listed here are appropriate to an engineering professional. You can further determine the primary role of the person as well. So in this case, his primary role is within civil engineering. We then have an attachment section where any kind of documentation for the resource, for example, resumes, photos, and certificates, can be stored. You can also define the cost rate of the resource within the resource profile screen on either an hourly or a daily basis. So over here, you can add one over here. Determine the hourly rates. Let's say maybe it's $80 an hour. And you can select the unit. So it's either per hours or per days. In this case, I'll keep it per hours. And I can save that on. You can define multiple cost rates for the resource within different effective from dates. So let's say this is from March 22nd. But let's say in the future, let's say in about 3 months' time in June, on June 22nd, his hourly rate will, let's say, increase to about $95 an hour. And you can save that accordingly. This rate is used to calculate the cost of the booked hours of a resource. We then finally come to a calendar history section, which lets you select the type of work week you want for the resource to have. When looking earlier in the video, it determines what type of calendar you have. So as you can see over here for Bob Smith, his calendar was the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday calendar, so the part-time calendar. But if you go down, you can change that for him. So let's say you want to push him onto a full-time calendar, you can select that accordingly. This directly affects the booking schedule, where each resource's work week will be dependent on their set work week calendar. So this comes to the end of my resource profile video. I hope this has helped. Thank you.